this weird camera in front of you? It is the brand new GoPro Mission 1 ILS. This is a GoPro camera with a micro 4/3 lens mount on it, and it is one of the most confusing cameras I have ever had to review. I mean, I've gone from excitement when this was first announced to crushing disappointment when I found out it would only work with manual lenses, to excitement thinking about it as a Super 16 camera, to incredible frustration when it was annoying to use, and then actually I was pretty happy with the footage that came out of it. I'm Jordan Drake, this is PetaPixel, and this review has been an absolute roller coaster ride. Okay, so I might have just thrown you off balance with the intro there. You're thinking like, micro 4/3 manual lenses, where am I gonna find those? Well, I did a quick browse this morning on KEH.com, and you would be shocked by all of the excellent native manual focus lenses available. I mean, the Vedras that Chris is shooting me on right now, a bunch of excellent Voigtlander options, and don't forget, if you use an adapter, you can use a ton of old photo lenses and get really cool results adapting them over to a camera like this. There's all kinds of options over at KEH.com, and don't worry, you've got a generous return policy, you've got a 90-day warranty on the vast majority of their stock. I mean, KEH is the place to go if you want to mess around with this weird little camera. That's why they're PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. All right, so before we get started, I'm gonna give you a quick refresher on the Mission 1 line. These are more professional-oriented action cameras. It started way back in the spring with the Mission 1 Pro, and what sets these apart from other action cameras is they have a relatively large Type 1 8K compatible sensor, and this is the same throughout the entire line. Now, the first two cameras that came out, the Mission 1 and the Mission 1 Pro, both had fixed ultra-wide-angle lenses. At the same time those were announced, GoPro promised the ILS, an interchangeable lens version, which we now have a full reviewable copy. Now, because I've already done a detailed look at the Mission 1 Pro, I'm not going to go over all of the different record modes here. More, I'm going to focus on where this camera is useful and where it disappoints. Oh, well, Chris films me in beautiful 4K capture on the ILS itself. In terms of the body on this, it's basically the same as what we saw with the Mission 1 Pro, although of course there's not an ultra-wide-angle lens attached. Instead, we have a lens mount, keeping the weight to exactly the same 207 grams that we saw before. The controls, interface, and dual screens are exactly the same as what we saw on the Pro 1, so that means if you've already got a few Mission 1 cameras, there'll be really no learning curve if you decide to add this to your kit. In terms of mounting options, this supports all three of GoPro's mounts, so you've got a 1/4-20 on the bottom, the classic GoPro mount, as well as support for their magnetic mounts. Now, the biggest difference compared to any of the other Mission 1 cameras is obviously this is not waterproof. Do not put it underwater. However, there is still a degree of weatherproofing as long as you can keep the lens dry. All right, so that's a great time to talk about lenses. When this camera was first introduced, I really thought it made a lot of sense using a micro 4/3 mount, because those native micro 4/3 lenses will cover a 2x crop factor. The Type 1 sensor on this is a lot smaller. It's actually a 2.7x crop factor. So that meant if you used any of those micro 4/3 lenses, they were gonna cover this sensor absolutely no problem. The issue is there are no electrical connections at all in this. So if you're looking at using native autofocusing micro 4/3 lenses, not only will you not be able to manually focus them, but you won't be able to change the aperture either. Those require an electrical connection. So instead, you're gonna need to use fully mechanical native micro 4/3 lenses or adapt fully mechanical lenses onto this. In fact, GoPro sent me a Laowa 7.5mm mechanical lens in order to do this review with, but I didn't want to be stuck at one ultra wide angle field of view, so I reached out to friend of the show and living legend Alex Mitchell, and he then showed up with a pile of Pelican cases. I've got everything from Kawa to Vedra to more Laowa to Zeiss lenses. I mean, there is an endless option here, so I could get a little bit creative with my cinematography. So thank you, Alex. Now, one big change is that moving to interchangeable lenses, unlike the fixed lenses we've seen on previous GoPro, means you now have to worry about focus. And there's good and bad things here. And certainly in terms of ease of use, it's nice to just not worry about focus. Basically, everything further than 2 feet was in focus with the previous Mission 1 Pro, but it meant anything closer than that, you couldn't focus on it, and you really couldn't achieve any kind of shallow depth of field. So here, if you move an object close, even with this smallish sensor, you can see here, you can get some really lovely separation from your foreground and background with it. The downside is you're gonna have to hit focus. And to assist you with that, we've now got focus peaking, as well as we've got 2 levels of magnification. But if you don't use an app or external monitor, you're attempting to focus with this dinky little 2.6-inch screen, which is an absolute pain. So what is this camera good for? Why did GoPro make it? Well, when it first came out, my immediate thought is, oh, what if you have a big multicam event, say a motocross race, where we've got a whole bunch of people wearing GoPros, but we want to cut to some different angles, like an ultra wide of the stadium or some telephoto stuff. Well, this will work very well in a multi-camera GoPro setup. I mean, all the colors will match. You can use the same apps and everything like that. But remember, if you want any control over the lens, that can't be operated by the camera body. So you'll have to set up like a remote control follow focus, zoom mechanism, something to handle the aperture. So I think it's only ever going to work if you're going to set the camera up once and forget about it. But then the aforementioned Alex Mitchell brought out another use case that I hadn't really thought about. And we got to think back to a little over a decade ago where there were some options for digital Super 16 filmmakers. There were things like the digital Bolex or the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. And those cameras would give you the option to use existing Super 16 lenses, and the coverage of the Type 1 sensor in this is actually very similar to those. Unlike those cameras, this can't shoot raw video, but it's still going to open up a whole bunch of creative potential that was not there before. I mean, if we think back to the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, that thing could record 1080 at up to 30 frames per second. Well, here we've got an 8K compatible sensor, or you can shoot 4K 240 or 1080 960 frames per second. This is a massive step forward if you're sitting on a pile of Super 16 glass. So what's it like to actually use this camera? Well, for my first experience, I wanted to use it pretty stripped down. The only accessory I used is GoPro's Media Mod Kit, which I would consider absolutely essential if you're looking at this camera. Here we get a headphone jack, microphone jack, micro HDMI port, an easy to access USB-C port, and there's a nice little stereo microphone right on the top of it. Only drawback to this is with the windscreen, it actually makes it kind of difficult to press the record button, but this grip also gives you just a little bit of a handle to hold on to, which is important if you use some of the larger lenses. And I was just monitoring using the built-in back screen, and I had a really good time shooting that way. Felt very freeing until I got back to the computer and realized I had misfocused and misexposed a whole bunch of shots. Okay, so lesson learned, I was gonna need a bigger screen. So I tried using a combination of the apps available for this through a smartphone, either the GoPro Quick app or their new Mission Monitor app, and that's exactly what we're using today. So this does really help you out. Obviously, you get a bigger and more detailed display on it. You can also apply some of your own LUTs if you wanted to. And with the Mission app, I found it really useful that I can put on zebras there so I can actually tell at what point the video is clipping. There's still some drawbacks to using these apps, and the biggest one is, even if you directly connect the camera to the phone with a USB-C cable, there's still a little bit of latency. So if you haven't preset your focus marks and you're just pulling focus by feel, I found a lot of the time you could accidentally overshoot if you're using these monitors. As well, you still have to download the GoPro Labs if you even want to get a histogram on this camera. This is clearly a filmmaking tool. It should be included right out of the box. And finally, when you've got all of these pieces on it, I mean, yes, it's a tiny little camera, but it's basically the size of a Panasonic GH7, which already includes all the things you need to get the job done. But there's another issue to having an interchangeable lens GoPro, which might not be immediately obvious, so join me in my office and we're going to talk about it. Okay, I'm back in my office and I've looked at the footage which I've backed up onto my Glyph EX80 SSD drive here, which I really like because it's very fast. This thing can maintain a write speed of 7,000 megabytes per second. As well, it's compatible with Apple Find My, so you'll never lose it. With memory prices going crazy right now, maximizing your value is key. So to find out more, just click the link in the description below. But let's take a look at some of this footage I imported, and I really want to talk about stabilization because this uses GoPro's hyper smooth stabilization, which is very well regarded, but it is digital stabilization only. You just have to manually input the new focal length every time you change a lens. So if you're using fast shutter speeds and get crisp frames, this stabilization can work really well. Even if we're using slower frame rates, here you can see footage at 24 frames per second, but I'm using a 400th of a second shutter speed. you can see that the motion is a little jerky, but the stabilization is actually doing a great job. But if you're using this camera for filmmaking, you're going to want to shoot it at slower shutter speeds for a more natural looking motion. So here we've shot at 24 frames per second at a 48th of a second, and you can see with the hyper smooth enabled here, we're getting just weird blurry frames constantly, even though the frame itself is actually staying fairly stable. And that's the big drawback to digital image stabilization. If you really want to be able to walk with the camera at slow shutter speeds and have smooth motion, well, you're going to want either lens-based stabilization or even better, in-body image stabilization, which unfortunately this can't offer. If you want to shoot at those slow shutter speeds and walk with the camera, you're going to want to invest in a gimbal. All right, so we're back outside again to try and answer the question, who is this camera for? And I can see a use case where you're recording an event, there's already a whole bunch of GoPros in the mix, and you want to have a couple of camera operators out there using different lenses, getting unique looks, and you know that the footage is going to cut in perfectly because it's still shooting that nice GoPro profile. That is a use case I could understand. But the people who I think really are going to enjoy this are those who like the Super 16 aesthetic and already have some compatible lenses, because the sensor on this has so many of the advancements that we've seen in the last decade. High resolution, extreme slow motion. This is a banging Super 16 camera. It's just weird that it came from GoPro. The other audience I think will really like this are anyone looking for slow motion but with different focal lengths, because having 4K 240, 1080 960, this is one of the most capable slow-mo cameras on the market, period, and it is quite affordable if you look at what this camera can offer. But in terms of the action sports enthusiasts that are GoPro's bread and butter, I just don't think this has really any appeal. But you might have noticed the people that I think this camera is good for, well, that's an incredibly small audience, and GoPro is in a lot of financial trouble right now. They need a massive hit, and unfortunately, I don't think the ILS is going to be that. But you know what? I'm a silly man, and I want your opinions on all the things that I said, so you should leave your comments down below. And we're going to be talking about this camera and my shooting experience with it on the PetaPixel podcast. You can watch it right here on the same channel, or listen to us on all your favorite podcasting apps. And if you really like the work we do, best way to support us is with a PetaPixel membership. And you're not just doing this to help us out. There are a bunch of perks that go along with PetaPixel membership, like having no ads on the website, and our latest perks. You can get 15% off Whitewall and Visco, 20% off Capture One. Those are huge savings you should definitely take a look at. Well, thank you for joining me on this look at this very weird camera, and we will see you all again soon with more videos from PetaPixel.